and police believe solving Donna's murder could help save other women in Florida. When Donna Martin hadn't shown up for work by lunchtime on Tuesday, January 12, 1999, her colleagues at ADT Security Services were pretty worried. She had relocated to join the company in Boca Raton, Florida less than 2 years before, and they knew her well enough to know that it wasn't like her to go AWOL. So one of her coworkers volunteered to stop by Donna's apartment and check on her. It was 11:45 a.m. when she made it to Donna's apartment, and from the very first moment she saw the front door slightly ajar, she knew that whatever kept Donna from work wasn't good. She pushed the door open to reveal a quiet living room. Too quiet. She made her way toward the kitchen and reached for the light switch to better see, but when the bright light washed over the kitchen, she saw a horrifying sight. Donna was on the floor next to the fridge, covered in blood, and still wearing the green suit she'd worn to work the day before. Frantic, the colleague called for help, but when paramedics arrived, they quickly realized there was no hope of reviving Donna. Retired Detective John Van Houten, who everyone on the squad calls Hootie, was the lead detective on Donna's case for many years. Even starting from day one. He told our reporters that when he first entered Donna's apartment, it was clear that she'd been stabbed, and he was pretty sure he knew with what. And that theory came from the fact that a knife in her kitchen was missing.
The knife was taken from a butcher block, which was on top of the refrigerator. And I don't remember if we found the knife, Bill.
We never found the murder weapon.
No.
That second voice you heard was Sergeant William Springer, who also worked on his case for the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office.
It was one of the larger knives. And if I remember right, the wound was down between her collarbone. Went down, hit the aorta, and she bled out right there.
Although paramedics had moved Donna from the kitchen to the living room by the time police arrived, the pool of blood in the kitchen made it clear where the stabbing had taken place. And both detectives agree that the evidence pointed to a surprise attack.
She has nylons on, underwear, bra, everything, and everything is intact. In my opinion, and the observation, there was no signs of a struggle. She never saw it coming.
And she was a petite woman. She was, smaller framed woman. And so she just folded.
It was a very cold-blooded thing.
The rest of the apartment revealed little else. A sliding glass door had been left partially open, but detectives believe Donna had left it that way herself to allow her cat to come and go. There was a missing pillowcase from one pillow in Donna's bedroom, but the bedroom itself appeared otherwise undisturbed. Detectives gathered as much evidence as they could, taking knives, clothing, sampling blood smears in the apartment, and dusting for prints. But none of the evidence gave them any leads. There were no unidentified fingerprints, and all the blood that they found was Donna's. But there was other evidence at the scene that helped investigators at least establish a timeline. For one, Donna's body was in full rigor, and lividity had set in when she was found, suggesting that she'd been dead for at least 6 hours. They also found a styrofoam clamshell container filled with wings, open wide on the counter on top of a plastic bag, along with a receipt for the wings showing that they were picked up on Monday from a local spot that Donna was known to frequent after work called Porterhouse Bar and Grill. All of this suggested to investigators that Donna was likely killed sometime in a short window Monday evening after getting home from the bar, but before she could dig in and eat. The Porterhouse bartender told Van Houten he remembered seeing Donna the night before on Monday. She'd sat at the bar, and he even remembered her talking to another customer, a man.
He just said that they danced. He saw cards exchanged.
Business cards, that is. The bartender said Donna left at around 10:45 p.m., wings in hand, but the man had left a few minutes ahead of her. He didn't know what they talked about or if they were planning to rendezvous after leaving the bar, but it's a possibility detectives considered. Even if it wasn't this guy, they wondered if Donna planned on sharing those wings with someone. Because though you can't clearly see the number of wings in the container from the crime scene photos, we were told that there was a large number ordered.
We don't know her eating patterns, so it could have been just for her and she kept some in the refrigerator or for lunch the next day, or she could have ordered for two.
There were 2 clean plates found on her living room floor, possibly knocked down from her coffee table when paramedics got to the scene. So, did she have company? And if so, who was joining her? Detectives got a lucky break when they found out the bartender actually remembered the name of the guy who danced with Donna, or his first name at least, David. They got an even bigger break when another Palm Beach County detective named Rich Carl told Van Houten and Springer that he felt like Donna's case had some striking similarities to another case that he'd worked just a few months before. And it just so happened that one person of interest in that case was named David. This other attack Detective Rich Carl remembered had happened less than 4 months before. That would have been in September 1998. And a lot of what we know about that attack comes from a deeply reported article by Lisa Ocker for Boca Raton magazine. A young woman named Kristen Anderson, or Christy as most people knew her, had returned home after work to walk her dog. When she got back to her apartment, she saw her front door was slightly open, but she just assumed that she'd forgotten to close it when she left. So Christy went inside and was listening to voicemail messages in her kitchen when all of a sudden someone grabbed her from behind and pressed a knife to her neck before stabbing her 8 times. Christy screamed so loud and so much that she later told reporters she thought it scared off her attacker, giving her the ability to call for help. Now, Christy survived and was able to tell police that while she hadn't seen her attacker, she had this strong feeling that she might know who the suspect was. Someone who'd been watching her walk her dog a week or 2 before. Now, she didn't have an interaction with the guy. She just remembered him glaring at her in a way that made her so uncomfortable it stuck with her. And here's the really interesting part. Yes, he had attacked her from behind, and that's part of the reason she didn't see his face. But she had an opportunity to look at him after he attacked her as he was running out the door. But even then, she couldn't tell anything about his facial features because covering his head was a pillowcase. When Detective Carl compared this with what he knew about the crime scene at Donna's home, he immediately recognized the parallels. A blitz attack stabbing in a Boca Raton apartment, a missing pillowcase from each scene, with no apparent sexual assault on either woman. The scarier thing about these 2 attacks was that it wasn't just those 2. Detective Carl believed them to be part of a disturbing pattern of crimes. Home invasions, assaults, women being punched and choked, and even one 7-year-old girl being taken from her home at night. It was all in the relatively small, safe, and wealthy area of Boca. These crimes were public, even printed in the local papers. But since none of the women had been able to successfully identify their attacker, police hadn't publicized the connections that they suspected. Most of the short blurbs mentioning an attack ended with a request for anyone with information to call law enforcement. So it wouldn't be surprising that locals, Donna included, would be unaware that there might be a predator among them. Her sister, Dawn Edwards, who you'll hear in a moment, remembers how excited Donna was to move there. I mean, she'd just gone through a divorce and was starting a second career after retiring from a government job in her 50s. She was ready to leave northern Florida, where she grew up, and to start a new life. Less Florida country girl, as Dawn puts it, and more posh professional living by the water.
And so she found this great job at ADT. She was their compliance administrator for all of ADT, national and international. And that she was excited about moving, making a new life, and the job. She was a work. She always got excellent reviews on her work. When she moved to Boca, we had this favorite aunt, Aunt Garnet. She was like, I was so afraid when she moved to Boca because, I just had this horrible feeling when she went there, she wouldn't be prepared to deal with city life, just way too friendly and way too open. She never met a stranger. She always saw the good. She met this guy one time that I already knew, and he was just a person. She came home and said, I met so-and-so today, and would you believe he's the president of this club, and just telling me all these wonderful things about people that I never knew. Everybody she met, she just saw only the good.
When Donna died, she was 53, and she was in management, so I doubt she was a totally naive and impressionable person. But someone had clearly taken advantage of her kind heart and good nature. And when Dawn first got the news about her sister's murder, she didn't have the first clue who it could be. She struggled to even come to terms with her new reality. Just the week before, she had talked to Donna on the phone, and now...
And I remember just crying my eyes out, pumping gas, and people just kept riding by, and I was like, how can people just go on driving by, riding in their cars when my sister has been murdered? How can people do that? How can I be pumping gas when my sister has been murdered?
Dawn and her family wanted more answers, so they flew down to South Florida to meet with Springer and Van Houten. By the time they arrived, Dawn was told by investigators that they'd already ruled out some of the usual suspects, ex-boyfriends, for instance, and in particular her two ex-husbands, one of whom also lived in South Florida.
He was an iron worker, and I think they did look at him, but immediately he had an alibi. I'm sure it wasn't him, and nobody would ever have convinced me.
Dawn remembered investigators telling her that they had even looked into the female colleague that discovered Donna at the home, but when we talked to them, they said that she had never been a serious suspect, which only left David. And while the bartender at the Porter house might not have caught a last name, Detective Rich Carl knew it all too well. So did 3 other law enforcement departments in the area around Boca and West Palm Beach.
Rich Carl says, we need to look at David Miller.
David Miller was a person of interest in Christy Anderson's attack, the stabbing from the previous September. Police records don't reflect exactly how he was connected with Christy's case, but we do know that he had been on the radar of law enforcement for years. For starters, he had 2 previous convictions for violent crimes in Florida. The first was an attack on a woman in 1984, not long after he'd moved to Florida from Illinois. David, who was 29 at the time, had been arrested in Deerfield Beach, which is just south of Boca Raton. In that case, Miller had snuck into a woman's home when she had left to do some laundry, leaving her sliding glass door unlocked. And when the woman came back inside, David had overpowered her and forced her to the floor, pulled off her shorts, and used the cord of an electric razor to whip her. Whatever he planned to do next was interrupted when the woman's sister and her boyfriend arrived. And the boyfriend chased David down and was able to hold on to him until police arrived. For that attack, he was convicted of sexual battery and aggravated battery. A judge sentenced him to 4 years in prison, but he was released early for good behavior, getting out in the spring of 1986. The second conviction he had is from 1989, when he was pulled over for driving with a broken taillight. It was the early hours of the morning in Delray Beach, which is just north of Boca this time. This incident is described in detail in Boca magazine. When the police officer walked up to the car, he found a 6-year-old girl in the passenger seat. When the officer asked David Miller what was going on, David said that he had found the child out walking by herself and that he was trying to take her home. Now, his story didn't add up, and no part of his story would explain why they also found rubber gloves, a knife, nunchucks, and a small revolver in his car. So police arrested David Miller, and he was charged with armed burglary, kidnapping a minor, carrying a concealed firearm, and carrying a concealed weapon. But in the end, most of those charges didn't stick. Prosecutors dropped all but the firearms charges. Vogue magazine says that was because, quote, the little girl couldn't explain how she was taken from her bed or by whom, end quote. But even with the most serious of the charges dropped, Miller was convicted of a felony of possessing a firearm as a felon and sentenced to 9 years. This criminal behavior that we see in Florida wasn't even new for David Miller. He had a record of violence against women even before coming to Florida. Along with charges over the years for having a concealed weapon and drunk driving, some of which were dropped, he also was charged with battery in 1977 after he was arrested for breaking into a hotel room and assaulting the 2 women inside. Those also dropped. So he was free 2 years later in 1979 to attack another woman. David Miller was arrested again and convicted of sexual assault and attempted rape. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison, but didn't end up serving all of it.
Because every time he ever got in trouble, I think it was his mother or his parents always got him an attorney. So he never really talked that much because he knew he was going to get an attorney. And they had money.
Like mom drives a Rolls Royce money. Various reports say that either his father or possibly stepfather was a property developer, both in Illinois and South Florida, during a lucrative period for developers. After he got out on parole in 1983 is when the South Florida Sun-Sentinel reports he moved down to Florida to join his parents. He pretty quickly met a woman who would become his first wife. But no one was going to make a good man out of this guy. Less than a year after his move to Florida, he's sneaking into that woman's apartment in Deerfield Beach. So by 1985, Miller had been convicted of 5 serious crimes in 2 states and had been sentenced to a total of 19 years, but served just 5 of them. In 1993, Miller was once again released, and he again settled in the Boca area where he remained through the rest of the 90s. So when an uptick of attacks, similar to what David Miller had been convicted of previously, started in 1996, it is no wonder that he was at the top of investigators' suspect list, and therefore a very likely candidate to be the mystery David from the porterhouse who was dancing with Donna the night she died. There was only one way to be sure, though. Van Houten and Carl took a photo of Miller to the bartender and asked him if he recognized David.
And he came in, and they said, oh yeah, that's him.
Van Houten didn't have to worry about making any quick moves to get David off the streets. Broward County Sheriff's deputies took care of that for him. You see, there had been an attack on a different woman 2 days before Donna was killed. It was almost identical to the incident that led to David Miller's first conviction in Florida. I mean, down to the apartment complex. An article in the South Florida Sun-Sentinel outlined the similarities between the 2 attacks. In the exact same apartment complex in Deerfield Beach, a 17-year-old woman had left her apartment to do laundry, just like the young woman did in 1984. And just like that previous survivor, this woman had returned to her apartment to encounter a stranger who snuck in through an unlocked door. The assailant wrestled her to the floor and tried to remove her clothing. Now, sadly, this young woman did not have a sister and boyfriend show up to help her, although she did manage to struggle and scream loudly. And that shout sent her attacker running, but not before he punched her so hard he broke her jaw and knocked out a tooth. Broward County became aware of David as quickly as Van Houten had, and they were able to arrest him after the woman in Deerfield Beach identified him in a photo lineup. So he was safely put away, at least for the time being, which gave police in the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office more time to look into him for Donna's murder. and they started by talking to him directly. Although, that wasn't much help.
What had happened was, and I remember this all the time, so we were interviewing him, and he had his legs crossed and his arms were crossed, meaning he's not talking to us. And I asked him nicely, put your legs down, sit up straight, and act right. And I said to him, you started to hurt these women because your mother wasn't here to protect you. And he started shaking his head. Remember that?
He shook his head.
Yes.
He actually agreed.
I said, and you've been hurting these women. And he shook his head, yes. And then he put his head in his hands, looked up and said, I want my psychiatrist and an attorney.
So he knew he had mental issues. And when he said that, we were kind of, when you want an attorney, we're done.
Even though they didn't make headway with David Miller himself, the arrest paved the way for something else: a warrant to search David Miller's property. Police were able to recover a number of things from David's apartment and storage unit, including sheets, pillowcases, and other bedding. They also found a pair of women's underwear, a bikini top, a bra, and a pair of silver earrings, along with a jean jacket that had suspicious-looking stains on it. There was also a shot glass from a local bar called Polyesters. And they were pretty sure that these items meant something and likely corresponded to other crimes, but none of it connected to Donna or any of the other women who had survived attacks in Boca. The most troubling discovery was David's stash of pornography. Not so much that he had it, but that he had done some amateur editing.
You'd have to watch every tape. I think there was 40-something tapes. And in between these movies, then it would be spliced in of an attack of a female.
He spliced 2 movies. He had a X-rated video, and I don't know if you ever saw a movie with Sally Fields in.
I'm just going to say
that she is on the phone with her daughter who is at home. They're getting ready for a party. The guy breaks in and starts viciously stabbing and attacking her daughter, and Sally Fields is going crazy because she can't get to her daughter. And that is spliced in the middle of this film. And then after you watch maybe 15 minutes of it or 20 minutes of it, all of a sudden pop comes this Sally Fields movie with her daughter being viciously stabbed in her house.
When David Miller's arrest began making news in January, it brought other women forward who said David attacked them. One was a woman named Noelle Culhane, and she had a very specific story about being attacked and stabbed in her home by David Miller after he followed her home from the Porter house. At the end of that January, police organized a live lineup, bringing in a number of women who'd been attacked in and around Boca over the last few years, including one woman named Tamara Parks and Christy Anderson, who we talked about before.
And then we took each one individually and had them talk. And let me tell you, when David Miller said something, you could see the fear on a lot of their faces just by looking at him talking.
And the 3 of them positively identified Miller as the suspect who attacked them.
The case against David Miller was getting stronger with these victims' IDs, and they'd been making headway in Donna's case too. Turns out, David Miller had lived just across the street from where Donna worked at ADT. So Van Houten and Springer come up with a theory. Maybe he'd seen or even stalked her before exchanging cards with her that night at the Porter house. It wouldn't be necessary, but based on what they knew about his pattern, it made sense. They know that Miller left the bar before Donna, and they believe that he followed her home when she left. Then it would be simple for him to make a show of pretending to run into her in the neighborhood or in her apartment complex, or maybe all of this is wrong and she invited him back to her place and was expecting him to show up.
I think he was invited in. I truly think he was invited in. People, they get judgmental and they say, well, maybe she invited him home and she shouldn't have invited him home. Well, you know what? She's a single female, and if she wants to invite some man home, then that's her prerogative. She's not doing anything wrong, but people will become judgmental, and they'll type their little nasty notes because they can get away with it because nobody knows who they are. Tell me to my face that the woman was wrong if she invited him home or if she invited him in, because she's not. She's no different than anybody else. If I was single and I met some young lady and I wanted to bring her home with me and have wings, and I'm not doing anything wrong. So, if she invited him home, she had no idea he was a murdering bastard. Excuse my language, I'm sorry.
There is also option number 3. Maybe he slipped in the open sliding door like he was known to do and surprised her from behind. I mean, remember, her pillowcase was missing after all. And in Christy's case, the pillowcase was used to hide her attacker's face. Why hide your face if you were invited in? At the beginning of February, while David was being held without bail, the Palm Beach Sheriff's Office named him as a suspect in Donna's murder. Before the year was up, David Miller had been identified in another lineup by Noelle Culhane, and a trial started for the attempted second-degree murder of Tamara Parks. No amount of money or fancy lawyers could beat the case against him, though. A jury returned a guilty verdict in just 4 hours. And here, finally, Miller was given a substantial sentence. A judge sentenced him to 40 years in prison with a mandatory minimum of 30 years. Prosecutors also moved forward with Christy Anderson and Noelle Culhane's cases, trying them together in the summer of 2000. Donna's sister, Dawn, attended that trial, and she remembers vividly how Christy described her assault.
Kristen Anderson, she told me herself he started at her elbow and cut her arm to the bone. Slow. Just stood there and cut her arm to the bone.
David Miller was found guilty of 2 counts of attempted first-degree murder, as well as 2 charges of burglary. The judge in this case sentenced Miller to 2 consecutive life terms. And in a statement to the press, the state attorney made a point that this would not include any option for parole. And that could have been the end of it. But somehow it's not. Because again, David Miller was able to get his sentence reduced. And now he is a free man. He was released last November. Local news reports that on appeal, David Miller and his lawyer challenged the witness identification that landed him in prison. Miller was able to get the charges for 2 of these 3 cases reduced through a combination of appeals and plea deals. The South Florida Sun-Sentinel reported that a court upheld the mandatory minimum sentence of 30 years in Tamara Parks' case, but that by pleading guilty to the others, Miller was able to get the 2 life sentences reduced to 30 years as well, served concurrently. And that dropped the total amount of time in prison from the rest of his life to just 28 years, because he was able to get 2 additional years shaved off for time already in custody.
He needs to be back in prison because I really, truly believe he will offend again.
There is still, of course, Donna's case, for which no charges have ever been brought. If he were tried and found guilty of her murder, it could put him back behind bars. But due to a lack of evidence that would prove any theory beyond a reasonable doubt, no one has ever been charged with her murder, including the only suspect they've ever had in the case, David Miller.
Are you confident that David Michael Miller is likely Donna's killer?
Let me put it this way. My previous supervisor who taught me everything, John Kiyonka, would say do not get tunnel vision. So if somebody come along and said, well, it wasn't David Miller, it was John Smith, then I'm going to look at John Smith. I'm not going to throw that away and think, well, it's David and I'm done. No, I never do that. David's a prime suspect, a person of interest that we cannot exclude. My job as a detective is to exclude. So if I get information on David Miller, my job is to try to exclude him. And once I get him excluded, then I'm great. But if I can't get him excluded, then he continues to be a potential suspect. So is it possible that there's two David Millers out there running around? I would say there's always that possibility, but it's awful funny. When David Miller went to prison, we had no more females that were attacked in their apartments and viciously stabbed. If there are, then they haven't come forward or we're not aware of it.
Perhaps the most troubling part about David Miller's release is that the Department of Corrections has placed him in a temporary housing facility in Tallahassee, near Florida State University.
Like it's a stone's throw to the college. I think the area he stays in is called College Town. So there's a laundromat a block away from where he's staying, and it's a 24-hour laundromat. Well, that's his MO. They put him right back where he does everything. And so it's like, this is unbelievable.
When our team reached out to David Miller to see if he wanted to comment on Donna's case or speak to us, we didn't hear back. Donna's sister Dawn sees David Miller's recent release as perhaps the most pressing issue now, even more than getting a definite answer on what happened to her sister.
A long time ago, I was like, I need closure, No, that is not my thing anymore. I just want him not to be able to do this to anybody else. That's all I want.
Van Houten, Springer, and Dawn all agree. Miller should not be free. And they're hoping that there is a way to connect him to old cases and get another conviction to stick.
I would just like to be able to put him back in jail for another attack on somebody. Whether we'll ever be able to connect him to Donna Martin, I don't know. I never promise to solve cases. I never tell a family I'll solve your case. I will tell you I will work diligently and do everything possible on the case. It may not come out to what you expect, but at least we'll keep working it.
Springer is still the investigator assigned to Donna's case, and he hasn't given up hope that the evolving science could mean that there are new tests that could reveal a missing piece of the puzzle.
In 2004, we formed our cold case unit. So every time we got a grant, we would go through all our open cases, which were probably 300 back then, and we would look at all the different evidence and see what we could do. So it's been a progression over the years. And I know Don thought that we're probably not working on Donna's case. But through the years, we had worked on it here and there. We just never could come up with anything good. Because when they did the rape exam and they did everything, they never found semen, never found anything. So we were kind of in a dead-end thing. Her clothes, the problem with her clothes, if he was dancing with her at the porterhouse, then you can assume that he may have shed some hair on her, maybe he rubbed up against her, that maybe they're slow dancing. So if we got his DNA on anything like that, we're still dead in the water, because the court, the defense attorney is going to say, well, he was dancing with her, so you would expect his DNA to be on her. So it's, you know, it's one of those cases that you have to find something in the apartment exclusive that you could put his DNA there. And so far, let's put it this way, we haven't got lucky yet.
Springer had no comment on our question about any additional testing that could be done now that DNA testing has progressed. And the department has expanded their access to it. We know that much. But he believes that there is significant potential that there are other crimes that could be connected to Miller. And he hopes that anyone who was assaulted in Boca Raton, Deerfield, or Delray Beach will come forward now.
I think there's other people out there, other victims that, you know, that never came forward for one reason or another. If they're out there, they need to come forward. What bothers me, to me, and this is overall, to me, the human life is a precious, precious thing. And everybody deserves to live their life to the fullest and enjoy the things in life. And when you have somebody that takes a human life, they have now taken away the joy that I have got to see my family grow, my grandkids, my great-grandkids, and a whole gamut of things that they took away from Donna that she could never enjoy.
Dawn, of course, knows that more than anyone.
I will say this. She lived more in her 53 years than a lot of people live that get to be 90. She really lived her life. She was just so alive. Let me tell you, she was brave. She always had a lot of plants, flowers and plants outside. And I came home one day and she said, let's go out and water the plants. And she had them hanging on a bar. Her husband had set up bars and she had hanging plants everywhere. And she started watering. She screamed bloody murder and, get me the hoe, get me the hoe. There was a black snake in there. Now, if it'd been me, I'd have run. She chased that thing and he would turn and chase her. She chased that snake down and killed it. And when she was done, I was like, God, Dee Dee, you are so brave. She said, I wasn't about to let that snake get in there and get there where I was afraid to water my plants. She was going to hit it head on, whatever it was. She was not one to back away from anything that would take her freedom away. She was a blast, I'm telling you.
When George, Asia, and Lindsay were all murdered on a stormy Mississippi night in 2019, nobody in the area heard or saw anything. But in the days after the attack, rumors and conspiracy theories began running wild, creating a tangled web that detectives are still unweaving more than 5 years later. Around 1 a.m. on December 22nd, 2019, a woman we'll call Penny walked over to her local corner store in the rain to get some pills from her nephew, George. Now, he wasn't there when she arrived and didn't show up for the multiple hours Penny waited around in the storm. So finally, she decided to just walk to his house, which was right around the corner on Old Slag Road in Moss Point, Mississippi. When she got there, she could see that the house was totally dark. But that wasn't necessarily a surprise. The power had been cut off a while back. But what was surprising was the fact that the front door was cracked open. So Penny turned on her phone's flashlight, pushed the door open, and began calling out for George, slowly inching into the house a little to call out a second time when he didn't answer. When she got no response that second time, Penny went back to the corner store hoping that George would just turn up there eventually like they'd planned. But he didn't. In fact, Penny waited outside the store for another handful of hours without word from George. So bracing the storm, she walked back to his house to check one more time. When she stepped into the dark entryway again, she heard what sounded like a very faint moaning sound coming from somewhere inside. She followed the noise, using her phone's flashlight to light her path, through the living room, past the kitchen, toward several bedrooms at the back of the one-story house. When Penny shined her light through one of the doors, she saw blood. More and more of it as she panned her light over the bed where she finally saw where all of it was coming from. There was a semi-conscious, fully clothed woman lying there on the verge of death. Penny could tell that this woman was breathing, but it sounded labored. In the dark, she assumed that the woman had been beaten up. And when Penny tried to wake the woman and the woman didn't respond, Penny ran to find a nearby friend. The two returned to George's house together, and that's when Penny called 911. Just 4 minutes later, at 7:10 a.m., Moss Point police officers showed up at the scene. While it was now light outside, the house was still dark, so officers had to use flashlights to navigate the house and find the bleeding woman. They also found 2 additional victims in another bedroom. Here's Detective Kimberly Snowden, the lead detective on the case.
So they're going to do what we would naturally do. Clear the rest of the house, make sure we don't have whoever did this, or we don't have a witness in the house as to what has happened to her. Did anybody else see anything? And then during the search of the house is when the other two victims were located together. There was a significant amount of blood. We could look at that scene even before touching them and know that, they had passed.
Police immediately recognized the two deceased victims because they both had previous run-ins with the law. One was Penny's nephew, 32-year-old George Kirkland, whose family owned the home. And the second victim was 19-year-old Asia Norman, George's on-again, off-again girlfriend. They were found on the floor of the primary bedroom directly across from the room where the still unknown and still alive woman was found. Now, police could tell that the unknown woman hadn't been beaten like Penny originally thought. She'd actually been shot a single time in the head. And George and Asia had been shot multiple times, though Detective Snowden didn't want to reveal where. She did tell us that from the way George and Asia were positioned, it looked almost like George may have been trying to protect Asia, or like she was hiding behind him. The bed in the room was still made, so it didn't seem like the pair had been sleeping at the time of the attack, and George still had on his shoes. But it did appear to them that the unknown woman had been sleeping, or was perhaps under the influence of drugs, though that was never proven for sure. When she was transported to the hospital, she was administered drugs in the course of her care, which made doing any kind of drug test or tox screens down the line impossible. But tox screens would later reveal that both George and Asia had amphetamine, methamphetamine, and THC in their systems. And that, combined with the fact that the house they were all found in was known for drugs and illegal activity, made the theory that she might have been using too a strong possibility.
It was a known drug home where people would come in and out of and use drugs. I can't tell you for a fact that they would buy drugs from that house, but we know that there had been some claims of prostitution in that area and some drug use in that area. It looked like it was a house where people would just crash maybe from time to time, but there was some areas, some of the rooms looked like they were lived in. There was no power at the house, so there was no water at the house. So at that time, it looked like people were just staying there. We had also heard that the rooms would be rented from time to time. But with that, any and everybody had been in that house, so we probably had hundreds of people's prints that had been in and out of that house. You see what I'm saying?
She's saying it was an evidentiary nightmare. Though detectives were aware of illicit activities going on in the house, they had never actually responded to any calls there before. There wasn't much furniture inside, but with so many people in and out of the house, there were a lot of personal belongings. Detectives actually needed to call in help from another department to just sort through everything and collect the items that seemed most likely to have some kind of relation to the crime. They didn't find any firearms, but they did collect clothing, an LG phone, small amounts of narcotics, bullets, and shell casings. Now, the LG phone was found lying on the bed near George and Asia, but it seems like it was a burner phone. Detectives weren't able to determine who it belonged to or pull anything useful from it. The projectiles they found were all of the same caliber, which Snowden wouldn't release, and they were recovered from the room that Asia and George were found in as well. Now, there were no bullets found by the third victim. The bullet that shot her never exited her body. Now, as all this police activity was unfolding, people in the neighborhood were beginning to wake up for the day, and the massive police presence caused a bit of a frenzy.
In Moss Point, when we have something, the crowd starts growing. There's usually, on an average, 50 to 200 people that are up and down the street, because everybody knows it's such a small community with 14,000 residents that when something happens, everybody, not because everybody gets on their phones and everybody knows somebody that knows the relative, and relatives usually will arrive on scene, which is sometimes problematic because we have crime scene tape up for a reason. People will try to get into the crime scene, and it's insane.
Here's Asia's uncle, Terrence.
I was up going to get some coffee from La Super that morning, and one of my friends had called me and told me, he was like, man, check on your niece. I think something bad didn't happen, because he was like, he see police and yellow tape and stuff at the house she was at. So I rode by there myself. I rode by there to see, what was going on, if it was true.
Even though George and Asia's identities were spreading by word of mouth, it wasn't until the next day that police officially released their names to the public. Almost all other details of the crime scene were kept under wraps to protect the integrity of the investigation, though. And the lack of official information fueled a very powerful rumor mill. Somebody told Terrence that his niece Asia had been found in a closet surrounded by a pool of blood, clutching a hammer in her hands, almost like she had been trying to defend herself. He remembers hearing that there was, quote, blood leaking out the closet, end quote. George's brother Jonathan heard that George was found shot in a bedroom with a dresser blocking the door, while Terrence heard that George had been shot execution style while on his knees. Another rumor held that both female victims were pregnant at the time of the attack, which the Emmys report reveals is not true. So all this gossip made an initial canvass of the neighborhood challenging for detectives.
I mean, we had a lot of information. We had an overabundance of information, but nothing was firsthand information. So it was a lot of speculation and rumors that came in initially in the case.
No one in the neighborhood reported seeing anything or even hearing any gunshots, likely due to the storm that night. So with no eyewitnesses or ear witnesses to the crime, detectives decided to see if they could get anything from surveillance cameras in the area. Now, unfortunately, there was only one neighboring home that had anything, and when police went over there to ask about the footage, the owner said that the cameras were just for show and they didn't actually work. Investigators also tried to check cameras from ATMs, 2 nearby gas stations, a liquor store, and a housing project to see if there was anything unusual on them around the time of the shooting. Maybe something like cars leaving the area at high speed. But they didn't find anything to help lead them in any particular direction. So with nothing else to go off of, detectives decided to focus on the victims.
Who did they hang out with? Who did they have problems with? What hobbies they have? What interests? Tell me about their social aspects. Do they get online a lot? So we try to immerse ourselves with knowing as much about that victim so we can narrow who that person, who had access, with this house. Was it somebody they knew? Did the door stay locked or unlocked all the time? Did somebody just walk in? Did somebody break in? We didn't see the house was secured with the exception of the front door at that time. So we're like, did they know this person? So those are questions that we try to figure out early on.
And most importantly, who was their third victim? Well, they were about to find out by running her prints. It was about a week after the murders when police learned that the unconscious woman at the hospital was 37-year-old Lindsay Foster Herr. And it turned out Lindsay's mom, Cindy, had been worrying about her daughter, who had been MIA for days at that point.
Lindsay always texted me or called me on holidays. And I told my sister, Kathy, I said, this is not like Lindsay. And a mother's heart, and I knew something was wrong. And then I was sitting down on the 27th on my couch drinking coffee, and I got a phone call. And they said, are you Cindy Foster? And I said, yes, I am. This is the police department from Moss Point. And I said, yes, sir. Is your daughter Lindsay Herr Foster? And I said, yes, sir. Well, she has been in an accident. I didn't know if it was a car accident. He didn't say, which I'm glad he did at the time, because I would have lost it. But I was praying. I said, Lord, please. The whole time I was praying, I said, Lord, please don't let it be anything to do with something that she can't recover from. I said, just give her one more chance.
I know you might hear it a lot in true crime, but Cindy said it was true of her daughter. She really did light up a room. She was kind with a great sense of humor. But Lindsay had started using drugs in high school, and though she had periods of sobriety, she was in a rough patch leading up to the shooting. Lindsay had separated from her husband, and Cindy was taking care of her kids, not always knowing exactly where Lindsay was. Investigators determined that Lindsay had been staying at the Old Slag Road house prior to the shooting, though it wasn't totally clear when she'd moved in or how she'd even met George and Asia. The last Cindy heard, her daughter had been living in Loosedale, Mississippi, which is about an hour from Moss Point. Detective Snowden wasn't sure how Lindsay and George met either, but said it was likely that narcotics were involved. And George had a history of drug arrests.
He was a person we were familiar with from calls that we've answered or responded to. He had been arrested a few times, so we knew him, we were familiar with him.
According to George's brother Jonathan, George had gotten out of prison a few months before the murders and was about to celebrate his first Christmas beyond bars since he was 16. Jonathan said that despite spending most of his adult life incarcerated, George had a soft side.
That's one thing about him. He would help out a lot of people, man. I didn't know he was so kind-hearted because, with him being in prison half of his whole life, you have to put on a facade and actually be about this sometimes. So it was hard to trust him with all the tattoos on this. People would think that of him when you just look at him. But however, anywhere you went, you would hear that my brother was a really good-hearted individual, man. He would always help those. And he would help the street people, let's say that. He was a good brother. Even when we was in the foster home, he would always get me things, man. He had a really good heart. He could draw. He was talented and very smart, actually. But I guess people make poor choices. That would be the best way to explain it.
Following his release, George had been living in that house on Old Slag Road and would frequently rent out rooms to people in need. In fact, right up until 2 months before George's murder, Jonathan and his family had been staying in that house as well. Jonathan knew of Lindsay, but he never overlapped with her. He moved out just as she moved in. And they did that because his wife had been getting bad omens.
My wife had been having dreams that we was going to get killed or something. It was going to be a shooting come across there at some point in time, So we knew this was going to happen to a small extent.
Jonathan's wife wasn't the only one worried about safety in that house. Asia's family didn't like the idea of her staying there either. They were concerned about her relationship with George and his influence over her. The pair had met through somebody else, but had quickly become inseparable. And in the days leading up to the murder, Asia's family had actually been trying to get her to move back home with them.
Meeting George wasn't good for her because he was into drug activities, and we was trying to keep her away from environments like that, She had a heart good as gold, like mine. She didn't mind helping people, She tried to be respectful and mannerable, like we raised her, From what time she was around us, we always tried to raise her to be a child, to take your time and live your life. Don't throw your life away to the street life, I think she ended up getting caught up in the wrong place at the wrong time. To be honest with you, I rode around. I went from Ocean Springs to Biloxi. I rode around crying with my girl. Just thinking how much we tried to get her away from that house. It was just something, feel like more you could have done, but the truth of the matter is we done all we could.
As Asia and George's relatives struggled to come to terms with their deaths, Lindsay clung to life. But tragically, she wouldn't get the one more chance her mom was praying for. She died on January 5th, 2020, in the hospital, surrounded by relatives. It was a devastating loss to her family and a real blow to the investigation as well. Here's Detective Snowden again.
To be honest, we were hoping that she was going to pull through and that we would be able to get some information to help us in the case, but unfortunately, she passed.
Now working a triple homicide investigation, Detective Snowden wondered if perhaps only one of the victims was the intended target, and maybe the other two were merely collateral damage, which left detectives to speculate about a motive.
The motive doesn't appear to be robbery, so the motive appears to be personal, like there was some personal conflict between someone in that home and our suspect. Up close and personal, pretty much. Don't see where anything was taken, don't see where anything was left. You know, it just seemed like they wanted them not around. We started getting information, quite a bit of information from confidential informants that, you know, we have in the city, people that we talked to about the case that led us to, you know, we do have a person of interest. Several names come up, but through those different names that came up, this one sticks out the most. So there are other persons of interest, but there is one main person of interest, yes. He's a known user, known to move stuff on the street quite often, whether it's stolen stuff, personal stuff, just move and sell on the street, you know, kind of hustling.
We'll call this person of interest Charlie. He had a criminal history with arrests dating back to 2001. In fact, his name was C. Murder. And by all accounts, he knew both Asia and George. So, detectives needed to talk to him. Coincidentally, on December 30th, detectives ended up bringing Charlie in on a completely separate charge. So in the process of talking to him for that thing, and then connecting the dots, they decided to bring up the triple homicide. And according to Detective Snowden, Charlie just shut down. The little information he did provide in terms of his whereabouts on the date of the murders couldn't be corroborated. And when detectives tried to schedule a follow-up interview, he lawyered up. Detectives theorized that there might have been some money owed from George to Charlie, or vice versa. And maybe that could have been the motive. There were also some indications that Asia might have been involved in a relationship with Charlie, which created a rift between the two men, and therefore another potential motive for murder. George's brother Jonathan was also suspicious of Charlie, who had apparently lived at the Old Slag Roadhouse with George at some point.
I used to associate with Charlie through connections or whatever the case may be. And I don't know exactly how my brother was killed, bro, but Charlie had made a suggestion or doing something to his own family members.
Jonathan wondered if Charlie had this attitude towards his own family, what did that mean for a roomie? Detectives went back over their surveillance video hoping to track Charlie's movements. And while there was no visual evidence putting him at the crime scene that night, there was nothing showing him to be anywhere else either. But because Charlie lawyered up, there was no way to continue down this line of questioning. Plus, detectives didn't want to get tunnel vision based on rumors.
If we convicted on the rumor mill, half the city would be locked up right now. If we could just go, oh, the whole community here just said this person did it and you're going to jail. We can't do that. But half the city would be locked up right now because everybody's about telling on somebody else, but not wanting to go to the courtroom and testify under oath that they're swearing, you know, the information because they heard it from so-and-so, that heard it from their hairdresser, that heard it from their mechanic, you know, so it's constantly chasing down those things.
Another theory that was spreading on the street at the time revolved around drug dealings and some disgruntled gang members. George's brother had heard the same thing, though he didn't want to talk about this theory in detail out of fear of possible retaliation. And Detective Snowden was familiar with this as well.
We heard that too, but no, well, that was early on. There still is, you know, gang activity that may possibly be cartel related or believed to be cartel related that are in this area as well. And that was one of the rumors, but we almost hear that same rumor come up with each homicide case that we have. We can't rule that out. So there again, we have Charlie, who is our most probable person of interest, but we're open-minded that there could be something else. Maybe Charlie was, you know, contacted by this alleged cartel. You know, anything's possible. My thoughts, my intuition tells me it's one person, it was personal, and others were witnesses, and they didn't want witnesses. And solving this case is going to depend if that person responsible shared any information with somebody about it, then that person he shared or told it to, those are the people I need to come forward.
Today, Detective Snowden estimates that between family members, neighbors, and friends, She's spoken to over 30 people in this case that claim to have second or even third-hand information about who committed these murders, but no one has had any proof. She even mentioned that she's recently gotten some tips from the state playing card decks, but those tipsters only gave information that police already heard. Snowden said it has been over 4 years since she's had a real promising lead in this case.
Disheartening to us because we want to speak for the victim and we want to try and help the victim's family because it weighs on us heavily. You know, when we have these cases that we know somebody's got that bit of information, we know it's there and they don't come forward, then there's nothing that we can do. I always have hopes that we'll talk to that right person. As time goes on, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes it's a good thing. When time goes on, people may not be in the same situation themselves as they were in 2019. And you come right back around and loop with them and meet up with them and everything you needed is right there. There is some other things that the crime lab at that time wasn't taking that they would take now. As I reviewed some of the stuff, I thought, I'm going to follow up with some of those items just to see, because you don't always send everything you got to the crime lab. You send what you think is relevant. But we have a lot of evidence, so could other things be submitted? Yes, absolutely. There could be some other stuff, but I want some relevance before sending that, you know, not just, are we going to get something from this? Or are we going to get something from that? It's, you know, definitely the shell casings and things like that went, and I hope that there will be a connection with that at some point.
What Detective Snowden is really hoping to find is the gun that was used in the murders. If she can tie the projectiles to a specific gun and then trace that gun back to a specific person, that could be enough for probable cause. But in the meantime, Detective Snowden wants to go back through the case file again, page by page, to see if there's anything that was initially missed or anyone that should be re-interviewed. She wants her other detectives to get involved too, especially those who weren't with the department in 2019, because they can come at it with fresh eyes. And it's not just this triple homicide that she's focusing on.
We've got a lot of older cases too that we're working on. And I always try to explain to the families there's hope as long as you have somebody willing to try and keep the case alive and the momentum going. There's hope. Don't ever give up on hope. Sometimes we can solve a case and sometimes we can't. But we try.
For George, Asia, and Lindsay's families, closure is paramount.
Not a day go by we don't think about our family member, Asia. I had to pray to God and find closure that way with myself, to just put it in God's hand that he would, you know what I'm saying, seek justice and make sure that our family get the proper closure for her life, you know.
Man, the peace and closure that I want is I want to know exactly who did it. I want to know without a shadow of a doubt. I mean, I'm destroyed constantly.
You know, that person that did the horrendous act, they put a lot of people in torment for the rest of their life. Because from one horrific act, you have a lifetime of sorrow. A lifetime. It never goes away.
The screech of tires pierced the stillness of the deserted parking lot. Streetlights cast pale reflections on the damp pavement, still wet from a recent rain. A gray sedan sat parked far from the other vehicles, as if its owner had deliberately chosen a secluded spot. Mist clung to the windows, concealing whatever was happening inside. No one had paid attention to the car for hours. No one knew that inside, a life was quietly slipping away, and a tragic, mysterious story was about to unfold. As the first light of dawn broke, a morning jogger noticed something unusual. Through the fogged-up windows, they saw the motionless figure of a young woman slumped over the steering wheel, a plastic bag over her head. It was Bethany Dawn, 27 years old, and this was the final moment of her life. A death ruled a suicide, but filled with circumstances that raised many questions. Bethany Marie Sanders was born and raised in a middle-class family in Springfield, Missouri. She was the only child of Thomas and Linda Sanders, who always believed in their daughter's bright future. Bethany was an excellent student, musically gifted, and dreamed of becoming an educator. Her high school friends described her as cheerful, always willing to help others, and deeply faithful to God. No one could have imagined that this very faith would one day lead her down a tragic path. In 2008, Bethany enrolled at Southwest Baptist University in Bolivar, Missouri, where she pursued a degree in elementary education. It was there, during a student Christian prayer meeting, that she met Tyler Don, the man who would later become her husband and the central figure in the mystery surrounding her death. Tyler Don stood out in the student community for his intense devotion to faith. Tall, attractive, and incredibly persuasive, he regularly organized prayer sessions and Bible discussions, drawing in a small but devoted group of students. Bethany, who already had a strong religious foundation from her upbringing, was quickly captivated by Tyler's interpretations of Scripture and his spiritual ideals. Fellow students recalled that Tyler and Bethany's relationship developed at a lightning-fast pace. Within just a few months, Bethany became one of Tyler's most fervent followers. She began changing the way she dressed, gave up her extracurricular activities, and devoted most of her time to Bible study and prayer. According to close friends, Bethany gradually cut off contact with many of her old acquaintances, especially those who didn't share her deep religious fervor. Meanwhile, Tyler expanded his influence. What began as a small group eventually grew into a community of over 30 students who referred to themselves as the Children of Light. This group followed its own set of rules, schedules, and even language when discussing faith. To outsiders, it may have appeared to be a regular Bible study group, but to those on the inside, Tyler wasn't just a spiritual leader. He was considered God's chosen messenger. A university professor who once attended one of the group's meetings at a student's invitation later described Tyler as a man with an astonishing ability to manipulate psychologically. The professor noted that Tyler had a knack for reading people's vulnerabilities and using religious belief to foster emotional dependence. Bethany, raised in a stable yet conservative household, seemed especially susceptible to Tyler's style of leadership. In emails she sent to her parents during this time, she expressed excitement about finding her true purpose in life and about the man sent by God to guide her. Although the Sanders family grew concerned about their daughter's increasing religious zeal, they continued to support her, believing that faith would help her navigate the challenges of adulthood. In the spring of 2011, Tyler Don graduated with a degree in theology and declared that his group needed to continue their mission in a new environment. He persuaded over 20 members, including Bethany, who had by then earned her degree in education, to leave their current lives and move to Kansas City. The stated reason was to join the International House of Prayer, IHOP, a Christian organization known for its 24/7 prayer activities. In Kansas City, Tyler's group rented a large house in the suburbs and began building a closed-off community. Although they participated in IHOP events, Tyler maintained strict control over his group. He established a clear hierarchy with himself at the top, followed by a council of elders, consisting of his 4 most trusted male followers. Every decision, from financial spending to daily schedules, had to be approved by Tyler or this council. Life in the community followed a rigid set of rules. Members were required to wake early for group prayers, attend Bible lessons led by Tyler, and contribute most of their income to a communal fund. Women in the group, including Bethany, had to wear modest clothing, refrain from makeup, and submit to the spiritual guidance of male members. Outside relationships were strictly limited, and all contact with family was monitored. A former member, Sarah Martinez, later told investigators that Tyler frequently held hours-long sin-cleansing sessions, where members had to publicly confess all their sinful thoughts and actions. Those who refused or failed to confess enough were punished, often through isolation or loss of basic privileges, like privacy. Sarah recounted how her bedroom door was once removed because she hadn't shown enough humility during a prayer meeting. Bethany, as Tyler's partner and later his wife, held a special status within the group. She was seen as a model for the other women and was often used by Tyler as an example of obedience and devotion. However, those close to the couple noticed troubling signs in their relationship. Tyler rarely showed affection toward Bethany in public and sometimes openly criticized her for minor faults. This community gradually became increasingly isolated from the outside world. They developed the belief that the outside world was full of temptation and danger, and only the protection of Tyler and the group could keep them spiritually safe. In many instances, Tyler even claimed to receive direct messages from God about impending threats, making members even more dependent on his leadership. In March 2012, Tyler and Bethany held a wedding ceremony in a simple event at the group's shared home. Only group members attended. Neither of their families was invited. According to those present, the ceremony was somewhat strange, with marriage vows focused on the couple's divine mission rather than love or personal commitment. From the beginning, their marriage faced many problems. Micah Moore, a close member of Tyler's circle, who would later become deeply connected to Bethany's death, recalled that Tyler often complained about Bethany in private conversations. According to Micah, Tyler confessed that he felt no sexual desire for Bethany and was struggling with homosexual tendencies. Despite this, Tyler pressured Bethany to have children, saying it was God's will for them. The contradiction between rejecting sexual relations and demanding children left Bethany confused and doubtful of herself. In emails she sent to an old college friend, emails later uncovered during the investigation, Bethany began to question whether she was not attractive enough or not spiritually pure enough to deserve her husband's love. In the months following the wedding, Bethany's mental state gradually deteriorated. She became withdrawn, spoke little during group meetings, and often appeared with puffy eyes from crying. Some group members began to worry, but Tyler explained that his wife was going through a spiritual cleansing period and needed to be left alone. Sarah Martinez, who left the group in July 2012, recalled a disturbing incident. According to Sarah, she found Bethany crying alone in the kitchen in the middle of the night. When Sarah asked what was wrong, Bethany whispered that she didn't know if she could go on living like this. When Sarah offered to help, Bethany panicked and begged her not to tell anyone about the conversation, especially not Tyler. Signs of Bethany's mental health issues became more evident in the fall of 2012. She began writing in a journal, an activity Tyler discouraged, claiming that personal thoughts should be shared with the group. In pages found after her death, Bethany expressed deep pain and feelings of betrayal. She wrote about dreams she once had, of teaching, of having a happy family, and how all of it now seemed out of reach. Notably, in the final pages of the journal, written days before her death, Bethany mentioned a terrible secret she dared not write down. She wrote, "If I speak it, everything will fall apart. But if I stay silent, I don't know if I can live with the burden." On the morning of October 30, 2012, Kansas City police received a call reporting a woman found dead in her car in a public parking lot. The caller was a morning jogger who discovered the vehicle with the engine still running and an unresponsive woman in the driver's seat. When officers arrived, they identified the woman as 27-year-old Bethany Dion. The initial scene suggested suicide. Bethany was found with a plastic bag over her head, secured with a rubber band around her neck. The car engine was running, and the windows were closed. On the passenger seat was a letter believed to be written by Bethany, in which she apologized for failing to be the wife Tyler deserved, and expressed hope that her death would please God. When informed of his wife's death, Tyler Don responded with unusual calmness. According to the first officer on the scene, Tyler showed no visible grief or shock typically expected of someone who just lost a loved one. Instead, he simply asked about the necessary procedures and whether he could retrieve Bethany's car. As investigators dug deeper, they began interviewing members of Tyler's group. Most repeated the same story. Bethany had been struggling with depression, and her death, while tragic, was not entirely unexpected. However, some members appeared nervous and tense when questioned about Tyler and Bethany's relationship and about her final days. The case took a shocking turn on November 4, 2012, when Micah Moore, one of Tyler's closest followers, voluntarily came to the police station and gave a stunning confession. According to Micah, Bethany's death was not a suicide. It was a murder, and he was the one who carried it out. In a lengthy interrogation, Micah provided a detailed and shocking account. He claimed that Tyler Dion had ordered him and two other male members to kill Bethany because she had become a threat to the group. According to Micah, Bethany had discovered and threatened to expose a terrible secret. She and several other female members had been sexually abused by Tyler and a council of elders during rituals referred to as physical purification. Micah described how they meticulously planned the murder. They waited until Bethany was asleep, took her from the house, and placed her in her own car. They then used sedatives to render her unconscious, put a plastic bag over her head, and left the engine running to make it appear as a suicide. Micah even claimed that Tyler had forced Bethany to write the suicide note days earlier, telling her it was a faith exercise to show her willingness to give up everything for God. Micah's confession led to the arrest of Tyler Dion and two other group members. Investigators conducted a thorough search of the shared home and gathered more testimonies from remaining members. Several began to confirm parts of Micah's story, especially regarding the strange nature of the purification rituals and Tyler's tight control over the group. One female member, who requested anonymity, told police she had once seen Tyler take Bethany into a private room with other male members, and later heard Bethany crying. When she asked Bethany about it, Bethany vaguely replied that it was part of the cleansing process, and that sometimes salvation requires painful sacrifices. Bethany's parents, the Sanders family, were completely shocked and devastated by these revelations. They provided police with emails Bethany had sent them in the months before her death. While the emails didn't directly mention any abuse, they revealed a disturbing shift in Bethany's tone, from early enthusiasm about her new life to brief, emotionless, and at times cryptic messages. However, the case took another twist in December 2012. Micah Moore's attorney held a press conference announcing that his client had recanted his confession. According to the lawyer, Micah had lied about killing Bethany under extreme psychological stress after her death. They claimed Tyler's group had engaged in several days of fasting and prayer after Bethany's death, pushing Micah into a mental breakdown and delusional state. Micah's lawyer offered an alternative theory. Bethany had indeed died by suicide due to severe depression, but the group, influenced by their extreme religious beliefs, couldn't accept this reality. According to them, Tyler convinced members that Bethany's death was the result of a spiritual attack and could only be redeemed through deeper devotion to the group. In his fragile mental state, Micah began to believe he was responsible for Bethany's death, leading to a false confession. Investigators now faced a complex situation. On one hand, there were forensic inconsistencies in Bethany's death and Micah's original detailed confession. On the other, there was no direct evidence linking Tyler to the crime, and Micah had withdrawn his statement. To uncover the truth, investigators focused on verifying each part of Micah's story. They re-examined the crime scene, closely analyzed the plastic bag and suicide note. Forensic experts conducted detailed toxicology tests on Bethany's body, searching for traces of sedatives or other substances that could have rendered her unconscious. At the same time, another team delved deeper into Tyler's group. They interviewed former members who had left before Bethany's death, looking for evidence of the purification rituals Micah described. Notably, several former members confirmed that Tyler had held private cleansing sessions with certain individuals, though no one directly witnessed sexual abuse. An important part of the investigation involved analyzing electronic devices. Computers belonging to Tyler, Bethany, and key group members were seized and examined. Tech experts recovered deleted messages and emails, revealing growing tensions within the group leading up to Bethany's death. Particularly telling were a series of messages between Tyler and Micah, in which Tyler expressed concern that Bethany was becoming unstable and might threaten the group's mission. As the investigation progressed, a complex picture began to emerge. While it remained unclear whether Bethany's death was a murder or suicide, investigators uncovered substantial evidence of psychological abuse within Tyler's group. Consulting psychiatrists concluded that the group bore many characteristics of a high-control cult, with Tyler employing sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques to maintain dominance over its members. As investigators expanded their background checks, they discovered that Tyler Doohan was not the man's real name. He had been born Timothy Daniels in a small Oklahoma town. Before enrolling at Southwest Baptist University, Timothy had a suspicious past, including being expelled from 2 other universities for inappropriate behavior, though detailed records were sealed. A former professor at Oklahoma Baptist University revealed that Timothy had once formed a similar group there, which disbanded after several female students reported inappropriate behavior. No formal charges were filed, but Timothy left the school shortly thereafter. His name change and reinvention upon moving to Missouri only deepened suspicions about his motives and true character. Investigators also looked closely into Micah Moore's past. They found he had a history of mental health issues, including episodes of severe depression and a brief hospitalization following a teenage suicide attempt. Psychological experts reviewing Micah's interrogations believed he was highly suggestible and had likely been under Tyler's psychological control for a long time. Another notable discovery came from detailed analysis of Bethany's journal. In several entries written during her final weeks, Bethany repeatedly referenced dreams in which she was being choked or couldn't breathe. Psychologists theorized that these dreams may have been manifestations of physical abuse that she was too afraid to write about directly. In March 2013, after months of investigation, the prosecutor decided not to charge Tyler Doohan or Micah Moore in connection with Bethany's death. Although there were many suspicious elements, there was not enough evidence to prove murder beyond a reasonable doubt. The official report on the cause of death remained undetermined, with a note stating that both suicide and homicide were possibilities that could not be ruled out. However, the investigation led to other consequences. Tyler and several members of his group faced charges of psychological abuse and financial fraud after investigators discovered that Tyler had used members' contributions for personal purposes. Tyler was sentenced to 2 years of probation and required to participate in mandatory psychological counseling. Micah Moore although not prosecuted for Bethany's death, was hospitalized for long-term psychiatric treatment. Doctors diagnosed him with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and dependent personality disorder, results of years of psychological manipulation in a cult-like environment. Tyler's group disbanded after Bethany's death and the ensuing investigation. Many members required psychological counseling to help them recover from the emotional damage sustained during their time in the group. Some continued to believe that Tyler was innocent and that Bethany had, in fact, committed suicide, while others publicly condemned Tyler and shared their own stories of abuse and manipulation. Nearly a decade after Bethany's death, many questions remain unanswered. Did she truly take her own life because she couldn't bear the pressure and psychological abuse within the group? Or was she silenced, as Micah's initial confession suggested? And if it was murder, who was truly responsible? Micah, Tyler, or both? For the Sanders family, the pain of losing their daughter was compounded by the absence of clear answers. They established a nonprofit organization named Bethany, focused on raising awareness about extremist religious groups and providing support for individuals leaving cult-like environments. Through this work, they hope Bethany's death will help save others from a similar fate. Investigators continue to classify the Bethany Dawn case as unsolved and periodically re-examine the evidence when new technology or information becomes available. In 2018, an independent team of forensic experts was hired to reanalyze the physical evidence, but they, too, were unable to reach a definitive conclusion about the cause of death. The former lead detective on the case, now retired, remains haunted by Bethany's story. In a recent interview, he admitted that it was one of the most difficult cases of his career, not because of forensic complexity, but because it illuminated the darker aspects of human nature, the ability to manipulate, to abuse trust, and to turn something positive like religion into a tool of control and harm. The Bethany Dawn case has become an important case study for psychologists and experts on cult phenomena. It illustrates how highly manipulative individuals can exploit sincere religious faith to construct harmful power structures. Tyler didn't create an entirely new cult with bizarre beliefs. What made this case particularly concerning was how he gradually transformed mainstream religious teachings into a system of control. Bethany, like many victims of mind control groups, didn't recognize the warning signs until it was too late. She wasn't weak or uneducated. She was a smart student with a stable family background, but she had a strong and sincere faith, which Tyler knew how to exploit. He skillfully made her believe that questioning his behavior was equivalent to questioning her own faith, a line she didn't dare cross until the final days of her life. Experts have pointed out that Tyler's group displayed nearly all the warning signs of a mind control organization, isolating members from family and friends, creating financial and emotional dependency, using punishment and shame to ensure compliance, and controlling the information members had access to. Notably, Tyler didn't build his group by claiming to be a god or prophet, but by asserting that he was merely a brother, helping others achieve spiritual salvation, a subtler and harder to detect approach. Bethany Dawn's story, though lacking a clear legal conclusion, has left behind many important lessons. It reminds us of the need to maintain a healthy balance between faith and reasons, so as not to lose our ability to think critically even in the pursuit of noble spiritual ideals. It also underscores the importance of recognizing signs of manipulation and abuse within religious communities. For those in law enforcement and forensic psychology, the case raises important questions about the boundary between suicide and homicide in situations involving deep psychological manipulation. If someone is pushed to the brink of despair and ends their life due to systematic coercion, is that truly suicide in the traditional sense? The case also highlights the challenges of investigating incidents involving insular groups when members are bound by loyalty, fear, or even sincere belief that they're protecting something sacred. Uncovering the truth can become extraordinarily difficult. In Bethany's case, even when one member came forward to confess to a crime, it could not be determined whether that confession was true or the result of a damaged and confused mind. Bethany Dawn's death remains a mystery without a definitive answer. Whether it was suicide born of despair or murder meant to silence her, her tragedy stemmed from a toxic environment created by a man who turned faith into a tool of control. Her story serves as a warning about how fanaticism can gradually evolve from sincere belief, and how those with harmful intentions can exploit others' spiritual aspirations. In a society where the line between religious freedom and psychological abuse can sometimes blur, the Bethany Dawn case raises difficult questions about how to protect individuals from manipulation without infringing on their freedoms. It reminds us that a lack of vigilance even in the pursuit of the noblest values, can lead to catastrophic consequences. On a more personal level, Bethany's story is a reminder of how vulnerable we all are to those who know how to exploit our need for meaning, belonging, and affirmation. From a promising student with dreams and ambitions, she was gradually drawn into a web of control and abuse that she could not escape. Today, Bethany's grave lies under the shade of an old oak tree in her family cemetery in Springfield. Her parents visit often, bringing flowers in the hope that one day they will know the full truth about what happened to their daughter. And in the meantime, Bethany's story continues to be told, not just as an unresolved mystery, but as a cautionary tale about the dangers of fanaticism and the necessity of holding on to critical thought, even within our deepest beliefs. As the years go by, investigators still occasionally receive new information about the case, often from former members of the group who have found the courage to speak out after years of therapy and recovery. Although these new pieces may never lead to a legally definitive conclusion, they help to clarify the picture of what occurred in the final days and weeks of Bethany's life. For many, the mystery of Bethany Dawn's death is not just about whether it was suicide or murder, but about how positive faith can be distorted into a mechanism of control, how blind devotion can lead to tragedy, and how the line between spiritual guidance and manipulation can sometimes be terrifyingly thin. Perhaps that is Bethany Dawn's true legacy. Not an unsolved case, but a wake-up call about the need to protect not only our bodies but our minds and spirits from those who seek to control both. In a world where the need for meaning and belonging is profound, her story reminds us that sometimes the greatest danger doesn't come from obvious enemies, but from those we trust to lead us toward the light. The sound of the wind howled through towering pine trees, mingled with the crunch of snow under hurried footsteps in the darkness. A pale moon cast a ghostly glow over the white snow, forming eerie shadows along the slopes of Hoosier Pass near Breckenridge, Colorado. The temperature had dropped well below freezing, and the cold air sliced through skin like sharp blades. In the distance, the hesitant sound of a car engine echoed, then stopped, replaced by the hurried footsteps on snow. In the pitch-black night of winter, 2 gunshots rang out, short and deadly, then disappeared into the still silence of the Rocky Mountains. No one could have imagined that those sounds marked the beginning of a mystery that would last 4 decades, a double homicide that would become one of the most notorious unsolved cases in Colorado history, until science and persistence finally brought justice. January 13th, 1982, a day of heavy snowfall in Summit County, Colorado. Breckenridge, a quaint ski town nestled at the foot of the mountains, was bustling with tourists seeking the thrill of snow-covered slopes. Amid the cheerful atmosphere, 2 young women, strangers to each other, were living the final hours of their lives unknowingly. Annette Schnee, a 21-year-old blonde with a warm smile and bright eyes, had moved from Iowa to the Colorado mountains with dreams of a new life. She worked 2 jobs, housekeeping at a ski lodge and serving cocktails at a local bar in Frisco. That day, Annette visited a clinic in Breckenridge for a checkup and was last seen hitchhiking back to work. She was wearing a blue jean jacket, blue jeans, and, most notably, a pair of bright orange boot socks, a seemingly trivial detail that would later become a crucial clue in the case. Meanwhile, not far away, Bobby Jo Oberholzer, a 29-year-old brunette with a strong personality, was having a joyful day. Bobby Jo worked at a real estate company in Breckenridge and had just received a promotion. To celebrate, she met friends at a local bar. Around 7:30 p.m., she called her husband, Jeff Oberholzer, to let him know she was hitchhiking home and would see him soon. That would be the last time anyone heard her voice. Night fell quickly over the Rockies, bringing a fierce snowstorm. Jeff Oberholzer waited for his wife, worried. When 10 p.m. passed, then 11, and there was still no sign of Bobby Jo, he began calling friends and hospitals. No one knew anything. The next morning, an official search was launched. On January 14th, just 1 day after her disappearance, Bobby Jo's body was found off Highway 9 near Hoosier Pass. She had been shot twice in the chest. The truck she had borrowed from Jeff that day was found abandoned not far from the scene, with blood on the door and signs of a struggle. Her ID card and a spent bullet were scattered in the snow nearby. Meanwhile, Annette Schnee was still missing. No one knew that the fates of these 2 women had become intertwined on that fateful night. It wasn't until 6 months later that Annette's body was discovered in a remote creek, about 20 miles from where Bobby Jo had been killed. She too had been shot, once in the back, and on her body was a strange clue, an orange boot sock, identical to the one found near Bobby Jo's crime scene. Another puzzling detail: in Annette's pocket, investigators found a business card belonging to Jeff Oberholzer, Bobby Joe's husband. The double murder instantly shocked the small Breckenridge community. Investigators from the Summit County Sheriff's Office got to work quickly, but they faced immense challenges. Harsh weather, rugged terrain, and the time gap between the disappearances and the discovery of the bodies had degraded much of the evidence. At first, Jeff Oberholzer became the prime suspect. This was standard procedure. Family members are often the first to be investigated in homicide cases. Suspicion only grew when his business card was found in Annette Schnee's pocket. How could this card connect two women who were supposedly strangers? Jeff explained that he often handed out his business cards to hitchhikers, as he used to be a taxi driver and frequently picked up passengers. He may have given Annette a ride at some point earlier. Still, many in the community, and even some investigators, remained skeptical. The pressure weighed heavily on Jeff, making his life difficult for many years. One more bizarre detail complicated matters. Jeff had a hunch about where Annette's body might be found. In a police interview, he pointed to an area on the map close to where her body was ultimately discovered. To some, this seemed like proof of guilt. To others, it was a strange coincidence, or perhaps the insight of a local familiar with remote areas where a killer might hide a body. However, initial testing found no DNA or fingerprints linking Jeff to either crime scene. As investigators expanded their search, other suspects were identified. There were rumors of a mysterious man in the area, reports of a red or orange truck seen on the night of the murders, and even speculation that a serial killer might have passed through Breckenridge. One complicating factor was the timing. Bobby Joe vanished around 7:30 p.m., while Annette was believed to have disappeared earlier that afternoon. How could one killer be connected to two abductions that occurred hours apart and in different locations? And how did the same orange boot sock end up at both scenes? Investigators floated a theory. Annette might have been abducted first, and her sock accidentally fell at Bobby Joe's crime scene, while the killer was attacking the second victim. This could explain why only one sock was found at each location, but many questions remained unanswered. As months turned into years, the case gradually went cold. New leads became fewer, and limited resources forced investigators to focus on more urgent cases. However, a few dedicated officers refused to let the case fade away, continuing to review files in their spare time and occasionally consulting FBI agents about new investigative techniques. As the 1980s gave way to the 1990s and then the 2000s, the families of Annette and Bobby Joe learned to live with the pain and uncertainty. Each year, on the anniversary of the murders, they reached out to the media, hoping renewed attention might bring a lead. Over time, the two families developed a special bond, united by their shared grief and determination to see justice. In 2012, 30 years after the murders, a major breakthrough occurred. The Summit County Sheriff's Office established a new unit focused on cold cases, and the Schnee Oberholzer case became a top priority. Detective Jared Wabel, a young investigator passionate about cold cases, was assigned the case. Wabel began by thoroughly reviewing all case files, thousands of pages of reports, interviews, and crime scene photos. He discovered that some key pieces of evidence were still well preserved in the evidence locker, including biological material that could contain the killer's DNA. With modern advancements in forensic science, especially DNA analysis, Wabel hoped these samples could offer new clues. In 2015, DNA samples from the crime scenes were sent to a lab specializing in advanced forensic analysis. The killer's DNA was successfully extracted, but it didn't match any profiles in the Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, the FBI's national database of convicted offenders. This was both a step forward, as they now had the suspect's DNA profile, and a setback since it yielded no matches. But technology continued to evolve. In 2018, a groundbreaking new technique caught the attention of investigators nationwide: forensic genetic genealogy. This method uses DNA to search for relatives of a suspect in public genetic databases, platforms where people upload their DNA to learn about ancestry and find distant relatives. This technique had cracked the Golden State Killer case in California in 2018, and Colorado investigators hoped it could also be the key to solving the Schnee Oberholzer murders. Agent Wabel contacted United Data Connect, a private company specializing in forensic genetic genealogy, run by former FBI agent Mitch Morrissey. Morrissey and his team took on the case, uploaded the suspect's DNA to a genetic database, and began searching for distant relatives who could lead them to the killer. In early 2021, after months of carefully analyzing genetic relationships and building a family tree, United Data Connect produced a name: Alan Lee Phillips, a longtime resident of nearby Clear Creek County. Phillips, then 70 years old, had lived a relatively quiet life. He worked as a mechanic in a neighboring area and appeared to have no significant criminal record, explaining why his DNA wasn't in CODIS. But as investigators dug deeper into Phillips' past, they uncovered a stunning detail. In 1973, 9 years before the Schnee Oberholzer case, Phillips had been arrested for assault and theft in a nearby county. According to case records, he had attacked a female hitchhiker in a disturbingly similar scenario to the current case. However, that case was eventually pled down to a lesser charge, and Phillips did not serve much jail time. There was another strange detail. On the very night Annette and Bobby Joe were killed, Alan Phillips was reported to have been rescued from a snowstorm on Guanella Pass, not far from Breckenridge. A sheriff had spotted the blinking headlights of Phillips' vehicle from a plane, and a rescue team was dispatched to assist him. Phillips explained that he had gotten stuck in the snow while driving home. At the time, no one questioned his story. But now, based on the new findings, investigators began to wonder whether that had been a deliberate attempt to create an alibi. To confirm that the DNA from the crime scenes matched Alan Phillips, investigators needed to collect a fresh DNA sample from him, ideally without alerting him. They followed Phillips for several days, waiting for their opportunity. Eventually, they obtained a discarded takeout bag from a Sonic restaurant Phillips had visited. From it, they were able to extract DNA and compare it to the crime scene sample. The result was a definitive match. On February 24, 2021, nearly 40 years after Annette Schnee and Bobby Joe Oberholzer were murdered, Alan Lee Phillips was arrested while driving home from work. When the officer informed him he was being arrested for murder, Phillips reportedly responded calmly with a simple remark, expressing surprise that they had finally come for him. Phillips' trial began in August 2022 at the Park County Courthouse in Colorado. 40 years after the crime, many original witnesses had passed away or were unable to testify due to poor health. Much of the physical evidence had deteriorated over time. Nevertheless, prosecutors remained confident in their case, relying heavily on the irrefutable DNA evidence. Throughout the trial, prosecutors outlined how Phillips had intercepted 2 separate women on the same fateful night, likely while they were hitchhiking during the snowstorm. According to their theory, Phillips killed Bobby Joe first near Hoosier Pass, possibly after she resisted his attack. He then drove roughly 20 miles away with Annette, where he killed her and left her body in a secluded stream. Phillips' defense team tried to sow doubt by highlighting gaps in the timeline and suggesting alternate explanations for how the orange boot sock and Jeff's business card could have linked the cases without involving their client. They also tried to undermine the reliability of the DNA evidence, arguing that contamination could have occurred over the decades. But the jury was not convinced by the defense's arguments. After only 5 hours of deliberation, they found Phillips guilty on all counts. First-degree murder of both Annette Schnee and Bobby Joe Oberholzer. In November 2022, the judge sentenced Phillips to 2 consecutive life terms, without the possibility of parole. As the sentence was handed down, the families of Annette and Bobby Joe quietly wept in the gallery. The moment marked the result of 4 decades of waiting, struggle, and unrelenting hope that justice would finally be served. Although Phillips was convicted, many unanswered questions about the case remain. Some investigators believe there may be additional victims. The 6-month gap between the murders and the discovery of Annette's body, along with Phillips' earlier 1973 attack on a female hitchhiker, raised questions about whether he may have committed other unresolved assaults or murders in the area. Investigators are now reviewing other cold cases in the region to see if they might be connected to Phillips. His DNA has been added to CODIS, allowing it to be compared with evidence from crime scenes across the country. For the families of Annette and Bobby Joe, the trial provided a form of closure that will never truly erase their pain, but at least it brought a sense of relief and resolution. After the trial, they made a pilgrimage together to the locations where the bodies of Annette and Bobby Joe had been found, to pay their respects and remember. What were once scenes of brutal crime have now been transformed into sacred spaces of remembrance and healing. The victims' families expressed their deep gratitude for the tireless efforts of the investigators, especially Agent Wabel, who refused to let the case go cold. They also praised the power of DNA technology and genetic genealogy, which helped solve a case once thought unsolvable. The Schnee Oberholzer case represents a victory not only for the victims' families, but for law enforcement as a whole. It stands as a testament to perseverance, the power of modern technology, and the importance of never giving up in the pursuit of justice. It also highlights the critical importance of long-term evidence preservation. Without the careful maintenance of physical evidence over 4 decades, the case might never have been solved. For the Breckenridge community and Summit County at large, the case's resolution brought a collective sense of relief. For decades, the shadow of the unsolved murders had haunted the town, fostering a persistent sense of unease, especially among women traveling alone or those forced to hitchhike in remote areas. Now, with the killer brought to justice, a dark chapter in local history has finally come to a close. In the months following Alan Phillips' arrest, investigators revealed more details about the complex investigation behind his capture. Collecting and analyzing DNA from the crime scenes was an extremely meticulous task, requiring patience assistance, and specialized expertise. DNA evidence was gathered from various sources at the scenes, including blood found on Bobby Joe's truck, on her clothing, and from biological samples near Annette's body. After so many decades, many samples were degraded or damaged, making DNA extraction and analysis incredibly challenging. Forensic scientists had to use the most advanced techniques to work with the minuscule and often fragmented DNA. Once they had a suspect DNA profile, the genetic genealogy team began the complex work of building family trees from distant DNA matches. They identified several distant relatives, mostly third or fourth cousins, and worked to reconstruct the entire family structure, identifying common ancestors and then all the branches extending from those ancestors. This work required hundreds of hours of research, poring over tenant records, birth and death records, tax documents, and any other public information that could help fill in the missing pieces. The team created a database containing thousands of names, dates, and relationships, gradually narrowing the pool of potential suspects based on age, location, and other factors. Eventually, the list narrowed to a few candidates whose DNA profiles matched the timeline and location of the crime. Alan Phillips emerged as a prime suspect, not only due to the genetic connection, but also because of his personal history in the area, including his previous assault on a female hitchhiker. After identifying Phillips as the suspect, investigators faced a crucial challenge: how to collect his DNA to confirm the match without tipping him off to the investigation. A task force was assembled to surveil Phillips and wait for the perfect opportunity to collect discarded evidence, which legally no longer belonged to him and could be seized without a warrant. The task force followed Phillips for weeks but faced difficulty due to his reclusive lifestyle. He rarely ate out, almost never discarded trash in public, and appeared to be very cautious with his personal items. Investigators wondered whether he was paranoid or simply naturally cautious. However, no matter how careful someone is, they still have to eat, and eventually, the team's patience paid off when Phillips stopped at a Sonic drive-in for lunch. Investigators watched from a distance as Phillips ordered at the drive-thru, received his food, and then parked in a far corner of the lot to eat. When he drove off, leaving the used bag in a trash can, an investigator quickly moved in to retrieve it. The bag contained a drink cup with saliva on the straw, a used napkin, and other items likely to carry Phillips' DNA. The samples were rushed to the lab, where technicians worked quickly to extract and analyze the DNA. Within days, the results were confirmed. The DNA on the straw was an exact match to the DNA found at the crime scenes of Annette Schnee and Bobby Joe Oberholzer. The probability of a random match was astronomically low, less than 1 in a trillion. The investigation team had their killer. One of the most remarkable aspects of this case is how it illustrates the extraordinary evolution of forensic science over the 4 decades since the murder. In 1982, when Annette and Bobby Joe were killed, DNA analysis wasn't even used in criminal investigations. Detectives relied on traditional methods such as fingerprints, blood typing, and hair and fiber analysis, all far less precise than today's technology. Proper preservation of the original crime scene evidence became a decisive factor in ultimately solving the case. The initial officers, although unaware of future technological advancements, collected and stored the evidence carefully, preserving its integrity for future generations of investigators. Over time, investigators adopted each new development in forensic technology. When DNA analysis became widespread in the 1990s, the samples from the crime scene were tested, although the techniques at the time still required a relatively large amount of DNA to yield reliable results. As technology improved in the 2000s, investigators once again submitted the evidence for analysis, this time able to generate a stronger DNA profile from less material. However, it was the advent of genetic genealogy that truly broke the case open. This technique uses DNA to search for relatives of a suspect rather than the suspect themselves. By searching public genetic databases, where people voluntarily upload their data to learn about their family history, investigators could identify distant relatives of the suspect and then trace family relationships to pinpoint the perpetrator. This method is particularly effective for suspects like Phillips, who had no serious criminal record and thus wasn't in law enforcement DNA databases. It illustrates how even those who believed they had outsmarted justice for decades could still be caught through scientific advancement. The success of genetic genealogy in this case also highlights the importance of combining modern technology with traditional investigative methods. Although the technology identified Phillips as the suspect, traditional detective work, surveillance, covert DNA collection, analysis of clues and behavioral patterns was still needed to build the case and ensure justice was served. Solving the Schnee Oberholzer case had a profound impact on how law enforcement agencies approach cold cases. This case, along with other high-profile ones solved using genetic genealogy, prompted many regional agencies to establish specialized units focused on unsolved cases. After this case, Colorado increased funding for cold case investigations, creating a special fund to help local agencies use genetic genealogy techniques. The state also expanded the forensic staff at the Colorado Bureau of Investigation's lab to manage the growing workload as more old cases were re-examined. The use of genetic genealogy in criminal investigations is not without controversy. Some privacy advocates have raised concerns about using commercial DNA databases for law enforcement purposes, especially when many people submitted their DNA unaware it could be used to identify relatives in criminal cases. This debate has led some genealogy companies to change their policies, requiring users to opt in to share their data with law enforcement. However, in the case of the Schnee Oberholzer murders, there was little criticism of the technique's use. The victims' families praised genetic genealogy, calling it a vital tool in bringing justice to their loved ones. And for the public at large, solving a 4-decade-old case reinforced the belief that justice, though sometimes delayed, can still be achieved. The case also underscored the importance of persistence and consistency in criminal investigations. Over 4 decades, many investigators worked on the case, each bringing their own approach and perspective. Despite personnel changes, thorough record-keeping and well-preserved evidence ensured that no clue or critical detail was lost. It served as a powerful reminder to law enforcement of the importance of diligence and care, even in cases that once seemed unsolvable. As the case finally closed, the community in Breckenridge and surrounding areas began a long process of processing and healing. For years, the murders haunted the region, a grim reminder of the darkness beneath the bright surface of a ski resort town. The families of Annette and Bobby Joe, having witnessed justice being served, sought meaningful and positive ways to honor their loved ones. They established a scholarship fund in the women's names to provide financial support to local students pursuing careers in criminal justice and forensics. Each year, on the anniversary of the crime, a memorial walk is held at Hoosier Pass, with participants carrying flowers and candles in remembrance of Annette and Bobby Joe. Many wear orange items, the color of the boot sock that played a key role in connecting the two cases. As a tribute to the victims and a celebration of how small clues can lead to justice, Jeff Oberholzer, Bobby Joe's husband, who endured years of undeserved suspicion, finally felt freed from the shadow that had loomed over his life. After Philip's conviction, Jeff shared his story publicly for the first time, describing the pain of being doubly victimized, losing his beloved wife, and then being treated as a suspect in her death. His eventual vindication serves as a reminder of the collateral damage unresolved cases can cause, as suspicion can cloud the lives of the innocent. For the broader community, solving the case marked a milestone. Local residents, especially those who lived there in 1982, began sharing their personal stories of how the case affected them, how it changed their routines and sense of safety. Many admitted they stopped hitchhiking or picking up hitchhikers after the murders, a practice once common in the mountain community, where travel was often difficult, especially in harsh weather. The case also highlighted the challenges and dangers that women often face, particularly those who live or travel alone in remote areas. Local advocacy groups used the case to promote public safety initiatives, including better-funded rideshare programs and personal safety education. Alan Lee Phillips, now in his 70s, will almost certainly spend the rest of his life in prison, but questions remain about his motive and whether he may be responsible for other unsolved cases. Phillips has refused to admit guilt or provide any information about what happened that fateful night, leaving many questions unanswered. Some investigators still believe Phillips may be connected to other disappearances or murders in the area. In the 1970s and 1980s, Colorado's mountainous region saw a number of unsolved cases involving hitchhikers or lone women on the road. Many of those cases share similarities with the Schnee Oberholzer murders. Authorities continue to investigate these cases, using Phillips' DNA to look for potential matches. And while Phillips may never confess or reveal the full truth of what happened on January 13, 1982, his arrest and conviction have at least provided a measure of closure for those who waited far too long for justice. The Schnee Oberholzer case represents more than just a cold case solved. It is a powerful reminder of how evolving technology continues to create new opportunities for justice. As DNA techniques continue to advance and as genetic databases expand, the ability to solve seemingly unsolvable cases will only increase. Across the country, law enforcement agencies are intensifying their focus on cold cases, establishing specialized units and allocating resources to apply new techniques to old crimes. Lawmakers are passing legislation to extend or eliminate statutes of limitations for serious crimes, ensuring that the passage of time is no longer a barrier to justice. The Schnee Oberholzer case illustrates not only technological advancements, but also the importance of human perseverance and determination. Technology is only effective when placed in the hands of those committed to using it in the pursuit of truth. The ultimate success of this case was the result of countless hours of work by investigators, forensic scientists, and genealogical experts, all united by a shared commitment to justice. With every cold case solved, a powerful message is sent to undetected criminals. No case is too old, no crime is forgotten, and justice, though it may be delayed, will ultimately prevail. In the case of Annette Schnee and Bobby Joe Oberholzer, justice took 4 decades, but it came, closing a painful and difficult chapter in the history of a small mountain community in Colorado. And perhaps that is the greatest legacy of this case, a reminder that forensic modernization, investigative dedication, and the unwavering belief of victims' families came together to illuminate a mystery that lasted 40 years. It is a testament to the power of persistence and a demonstration that justice, even when it takes decades, can still be achieved.